आप सुन रहे फीवर 104 एफएम और भी जो लाइफ है ना बहुत अनप्रेडिक्टेबल होती है। प्रॉब्लम्स अपना रास्ता खुद ही ढूंढ लेती है। क्यों ना हम इन प्रॉब्लम्स के सॉल्यूशंस एकदम तैयार रखें, फिर लाइफ होगी बेफिक्र और आप होंगे निडर। लाइफ नंबर पे जो कि है 18002009।
You are with me in my town, New Delhi. Temperatures average around 40 degrees Celsius through the year. It's a dry and hot town. 30 years ago, I came here to do my higher studies in contemporary history. Those studies never came to an end. Instead, I stayed back to tell real-life stories. 30 years ago, this town was sparsely populated, and there weren't so many cars moving in a perpetual jam. Today, 16 million people live and work here, and the town itself is surrounded by industrial areas. There are illegal industries in residential colonies. Half the citizens of this town live in slums without toilets and kitchens, and loosely connected to the power grid. And before I forget, there is also the holy river Yamuna, which flows by this town. I dedicate this film to my teachers and the black river Yamuna, which was once blue.
ओम नाम सबसे बड़ा और इससे बड़ा न कोई, और जो ओम नाम का जप करे तो शुद्ध आत्मा होए। सदा भवानी दायनी और गौरी पुत्र गणेश, और तीन लोग रक्षा करें तो ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश। और लाज राखो इस दास का और पूरो की जो काम, और परम पिता परमेश्वरम तुझे बार बार प्रणाम। ध्यान मूलम गुरु मूर्ति और पूजा मूलम गुरु पादुका, मंत्र मूलम भाग्यम मोक्ष मूलम गुरु कृपा। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा, गुरु साक्षात पार ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरुवे नमः। बोलो जमुना माता की जय। मुझ में ओम तुझ में ओम, सब में ओम समाया रे। सबसे कर लो प्यार जगत में कोई नहीं पराया रे। मुझ में ओम तुझ में ओम, सब में ओम समाया रे। सबसे कर लो प्यार जगत में।
100 years ago, this town changed from the Mughal Empire's capital, Delhi or Delhi, to New Delhi, capital of British India. Then 60 years ago, we got independence from British colonizers. It was a strange time indeed, an ex-colonized nation moving forward in slow motion. With 3 brands of Indian cars, poorer people, not much of industrialization, and sleeping government officials. A painfully, slowly developing nation. But then 20 years ago, things began rocking here. The newfound economic liberalism quickly brought in multinational industries out to exploit our cheap labor, cheaper natural resources, and large markets. In short, fill our homes and lives with more and more of consumer goods. The result is, the air in our cities is now below breathing standards. Our cities' depressed infrastructure is unable to cope with increasing inward migration for cheap labor. Our rivers are carrying the filth of sewage, industrial effluents, and surface runoffs. In Delhi, River Yamuna is fast dying, and there is a lot which was connected to the river, which is getting lost in this rush of development.
Fresh water from the river is taken out at the Wazirabad barrage, and it's used to provide drinking water and water for domestic use to mainly North Delhi but also Central Delhi. And the river then, that water is then replaced by sewage.
There are 19 nalas that come into the Yamuna in Delhi alone. So by the time you get to Okhla, where the next barrage is located to divert water into the Agra Canal, The river is no longer a river. It's a cesspool.
Now, what are the threats? The threats are that the state plans to convert this river into like Thames, like Seine, like Danube, not realizing that these are Indian rivers. These are monsoon-fed rivers, whereas Thames and Danube, there you get rain every other day. Water is not a problem there, not an issue there. For us, water is an issue, a very important issue. So, our planners, they visit your land in the summer when it is very hot here, and they see all these beautiful river fronts, and they don't realize the value of this floodplain here. And they want to convert this river and this front into what is in Thames, in London. No, it is not on. It cannot happen. It should not happen. Because then this river will die. And this is not only the problem of this river. Even in Thames and in Seine and Danube, you have seen devastating floods there.
Cloning bits of riverside development around Thames, Seine or Danube could only result in half-hearted, patchy bureaucratic development and cleaning of our rivers. In 2009, I decided to visit UK and proceed to the northeast, the old hub of the first industrial revolution, to see the present condition of rivers Tyne, Tees and Wear. All old working rivers and therefore dead through most of the 20th century. In the 19th century, Newcastle's population rose 4 times. Overcrowding and lack of sanitation brought cholera epidemics in mid-19th century.
We are now arriving at Newcastle. Please take care when leaving the train. We hope you've enjoyed your journey.
Newcastle quayside and adjacent streets were founded on the waste of previous generations. Only by the 1950s, some serious results of sewage treatment became apparent. But in the last 30 years, heavy industries have been closed down here, including the coal mines. Air has become clean to breathe, and today I hear people get crystal clear water to drink from the taps, while the salmon is back in the long-dead industrial rivers. What a wonder.
I think the story of the rivers in the northeast of England is a really heartening one. I mean, when I was a kid, I was born in a shipyard house right down by the riverside in Hebburn Quay. My dad was a welder in the shipyard. It was my grandfather, and on my dad's side it was a pitman. And in those days, the river was dead. Not especially because of industrial pollution, actually. It was simply sewage. There was no sewage treatment. All the sewage went directly into the river from 1 million people, killed the river, and the river stank. And and I grew up next to it, and I just thought that was what rivers smelt like,
Development on both rivers has been at the estuary, because that's where the import of raw materials and the export of coal and products would have been. So we've got Newcastle, Gateshead and Tyneside on the Tyne, and we've got Sunderland on the Wear, both industrial cities during the 19th and 20th centuries, both with huge conurbations of population and very heavy industry alongside the river. You get not only industrial contamination of the estuary end of the rivers, but you get human sewage as well coming into the river.
A large chunk of the 20th century, substantial chunks of the river were more or less devoid of life. That's fairly extreme.
The most notable, I suppose, was the decision in the 18th century for the UK to route all its road drainage and sewage to rivers, initially without any purification. Our streets were...
Sounds like India or China, maybe.
Well, there are interesting parallels. I mean, the scourge of bad health in the early Victorian period in the UK was a public scandal. and in their wisdom, public health experts, because we'd only just learned about infection, contagion, the actual biology of disease, immediately there became the remedy of wet it and let the water carry it away. So sewage stopped being deposited in streets, stopped being removed by horse and cart and deposited in the country, and Queen Victoria made a very public triumph of the water closet. So you pulled your chain and then it went away who knows where, but at least it didn't give you a disease or your neighbours immediately. And of course where it went was to the river and the sea, and that really then became the model, a distressing model with no foresight at all, because industry then thought, that's great, we'll actually put all our waste into these things called sewers and that can wash to the nearest river.
The pollution, the discharging into the rivers of all manner of materials and pollutants, and particularly I think with the chemical industry, a lot of heavy organics, a lot of heavy metals. Nobody really knows what went in the river. That's part of the problem. There are various reports done by things like the Environment Agency, which documented, if you like, the state of pollution of the river. That's 20, 30 years ago. But I mean, there are all sorts of things that were just being discharged without anybody really knowing what they were. You could see the atmospheric pollution and the steam and the smoke and but actually that wasn't the problem. It's the stuff you couldn't see that was going into the rivers.
And when the mines were abandoned and flooded, the water rose through the old workings. It dissolved all of these salts. Large quantities of microscopic iron pyrites, and we got extremely metal-rich acidic water then formed in the mines. First one to hit us was combating surface water pollution coming from either the spoil heaps or flooded underground workings. And the second, more recently really, has been the issue of pollution of groundwater resources above the coal mines.
It was dirty, it was unpleasant, and it's taken a huge amount of work over many years to restore the rivers to what they are today. Now we have the River Tyne, that same river that was a smelling sewer, is the finest salmon fishing river in England and Wales.
I saw dead English rivers that have been returned to life, that have been given a perfectly manicured look to hide a history of destruction, disease, and God alone knows what long-term effects. But our Indian rivers, though dying, continue to be used with joy. We dump and bathe in them. We still have fish and fishermen. We have children diving in to collect coins, thrown over by devout Indians who believe rivers are divine beings, goddesses if you like. But in the last 30 years, since the developed West started deindustrializing, we started the second industrial revolution at a scale 10 times larger than the previous one. And to supply the men and materials, we are rapidly exploiting our natural resources and degrading our people by exhausting them performing cheap labor, all to produce more and more for the rising consumption of people in the developed world. But in this process, we have, however, caught the disease of consumerism ourselves. Do you see?
मिला कुछ पैसा?
हाँ, पैसे मिल जाएंगे ना?
कितना मिला?
अभी मिलेंगे पैसे तो ढूंढेंगे तो मिल जाएंगे।
क्या नाम दादा तुम्हारा?
महफूज।
महफूज।
Now these are some hard facts. This is perhaps the most threatened riverine stretch anywhere in the world. It is the most polluted river stretch in the country. If the state has to really do anything urgent for this river, it must desilt it. That is the most urgent step to be done in this river.
So political speech लग रही है यमुना के बारे में तो डिस्कशन तो हो गए 15 मिनट तो हो गए।
मित्रों, मैं जो बात कह रहा हूँ वो एक यमुना का वासी होने के साथ कह रहा हूँ। मैं कोई विशेषज्ञ नहीं हूँ यमुना का, मेरे बारे में ये जरूर साफ होनी चाहिए। मैं यमुना वासी हूँ ये मान के अपनी बात कह रहा हूँ। मैं यमुना को एक साफ सुथरी शुद्ध सदा मेरा नदी देखना चाहता हूँ। मेरी आंखें चाहती हैं कि नदी यमुना नदी ऐसी बहे जिसमें कभी यदि अभी पीने के लायक नहीं है तो कम से कम नहाने के लायक पानी है। जो जगह ऑलरेडी आपके पास है भूजल के भंडारों को भरने वाली, उस जगह को केवल आपको संरक्षण देना है और एक छोटी सी लाइन लिखनी है कि भाई ये जमीन तो हमारी अंडरग्राउंड वाटर सेंचुरी है, यहाँ पर हम कुछ नया कंस्ट्रक्शन नहीं करेंगे।
और कलयुग की निशानी है। कलयुग में क्या कहते हैं लोग हमारे बुजुर्ग, अब कलयुग आएगा ना तो क्या होगा, गाय विष्ठा खाने लग जाएगी। गाय जो है ना विष्ठा खाने लग जाएगी और 12 वर्ष की नानी बन जाएगी जब घोर कलयुग आएगा, और नदी अपना तरू पलट देगी।
इसीलिए state of the river tells you the state of the city. If the river is dirty, the city is dirty. If the river is threatened, mind my words, the city is threatened.
When for the first time the Yamuna was dammed, that means a structure was put across the Yamuna at Tajewala by the British. It was by the irrigation company. It was the first profitable venture of irrigation companies in India. This was very effective because it was based on an earlier diversion of the Yamuna by Firoz Shah Tughlaq. But he did a diversion scheme. He didn't stop for that. The British stopped for that.
हमारे बुजुर्ग बताते थे आगरा से नीचे शहर बताते हैं वहां थी पहले, तो वहां से जो है ये पानी की वजह से दिल्ली आकर के बसाई गई थी। अब यहाँ पर एक तो यमुना नदी का पानी था, एक यहाँ भूजल था। अंग्रेजों ने जितना भी एलम ये रोड बना हुआ है नोएडा जाने के लिए और पुराने पुल से लेकर के ये अंदर जितना भी जमीन थी सबको, इस जमीन को हमारे यहाँ इसको उन्होंने जो है बेकार घोषित की थी अंग्रेजों ने, और इसमें जो है चरगाह बना दिया था। इस जमीन का नाम है जनूबी चरगाह जनूबी। इसको और किसी काम में नहीं ले सकते आप, और उसमें जो है कोई मकान नहीं बना सकते या कोई बिल्डिंग नहीं बना सकते, क्योंकि अगर जितने भी आप 300 फुट जाओ 400 फुट जाओ वह रेत मिलेगा।
मेरा ख्याल सन 34 का जन्म है। जब देश आज़ाद हुआ तो मैं 14-15 साल का था, तभी से अंग्रेजों को मैंने देखा खूब।
अंग्रेज क्या करते थे यहाँ पे? अंग्रेज
यहाँ पे ये जंगल था, उन्होंने अपनी एक सैरगाह बनाई हुई थी। यहाँ घूमने आते थे, शिकार करते थे घोड़ों पर। तो यहाँ सुअर, जंगली सुअर वगैरह, नील गाय और ये ऐसे रहते थे, सुअर को मारते थे।
उस वक़्त आदमी आज़ाद थे और देश गुलाम। आदमी आज़ाद थे, किससे डरते नहीं थे, अंग्रेजों से भी डरते थे, मरते थे। आज भी गुलाम है, देश आज़ाद है। तो कभी नेता लोग आएंगे पीछे जय हो जय गाने लग गए।
1943 से 45 तक ये जहाँ गांधी जी लेटे हैं यहाँ से लेकर के लोहे के पुल तक विशेष जंगल था, और उसमें हमने इम्प्रूवमेंटर से पेटी ठेके पर ले लिया था। तो हम उससे बड़े आदमी से 1 आना लेते थे और छोटे से बच्चे से 2 पैसे, जितनी मर्जी लकड़ी काट के ले जाए। इतना बड़ा जंगल था।
पहले हम खेती करते थे, हम सारे, मेरा ख्याल है करीब 1000 किसान थे यहाँ, 1000-1200।
पहले तैराते थे यहीं पर ही यमुना में, अब तैराते स्विमिंग पूलों में। अच्छा, पहले क्या था?
52,000 बीघा जमीन थी। तो जब 49 में जितने भी ये भूमिहीन थे हम लोग, वो थे चौधरी ब्रह्म प्रकाश, उन्होंने एक कोऑपरेटिव सोसाइटी बनाई, दिल्ली पीजेंट कोऑपरेटिव मल्टीपर्पज सोसाइटी, और सभी किसानों को जो भूमिहीन थे उनको जमीन दे दी।
यहाँ मेन ऑब्जेक्ट एक था कि हम डूबते हुए आदमी को निकालने तैरना सीखने का मैं ये था और मैंने कम से कम अपनी ज़िंदगी में 100-200 आदमी निकाले भी होंगे.
The floodplain from वजीराबाद बैराज till वोखला बैराज. जो आप ईस्ट में देख रहे हैं, मयूर विहार, शादरा, ये जो एरिया आप देख रहे हैं, नोएडा, ये सब का सब किसी जमाने में इस नदी का ओरिजिनल फ्लडप्लेन था.
If we went back about 50 years, there were maybe 450,000 men in the region who were employed in either mining coal, making ships, making steel. If you look at it now, there are no deep coal mines. There's one steelworks, just. There are shipyards that periodically open to do some repair work. So industries that 50 years ago employed 450,000 men now employ certainly well less than 10,000, maybe 5,000.
This country was pretty savagely deindustrialised by people who didn't believe that it's either one world or one country, to be honest. And we had closures, forced closures of industries that were profitable.
If you look on the left there, see where the colliery wheel is? This is quite common that you'll find as a sort of a low-key reminder of the industrial past. The characteristic image of the colliery was the wheel.
Yeah.
So you try and preserve a bit of the wheel.
It started in 1972, 74, when we first deposed the Conservative Prime Minister Edward Heath. Margaret Thatcher came to power and she swore that she would get even with the coal miners. And she did that.
We still don't have coal mining back in this country now in large production. It's simple. It's a short-term policy by a vindictive government that wanted revenge because the miners striked and got rid of the Conservative government in 1974.
We're buying all our coal. We've only got 4 mines left in England. And there should have been 54 because these collieries were still viable.
Margaret Thatcher wanted rid of the influence of the National Union of Mine Workers. She wanted rid of communities which supported each other against all her aims and values.
To crush the miners and the mining industry. They were the powerhouses behind the unions. They were the foremost union.
Now some of these poor fellas are pushing empty trolleys in hypermarkets for the minimum wage, and how degrading is that for a man who is, brought up his family.
To the northeast, which was a rural economy 300 years ago, coal came along, followed by industry, engineering, shipyards, steelworks, and there's just so little of it left. And even the evidence is almost, you have to go and look for it.
But the thing I think we've got to bear in mind is that where money is concerned, there is no ethics.
No.
And there certainly is no sense of humanity.
The only rule is profit.
Yeah.
That was one of the fundamentals of the Thatcher government. Whatever she said in a high-minded way, she tried to cloak all this in a nice, morally acceptable manner, but in reality it was greed and the minority getting richer who are already rich. That's the rule. Because ultimately all this talk of a share-run and democracy is complete hogwash, that it's still down to a small number of very wealthy people who own the businesses in this country.
We have so much expertise and knowledge that is stagnant, and we have so much coal left to mine that I think it's an absolute tragedy. It's disgraceful. The world is dependent now on coal from India, from coal from China.
This is, yeah, but this is very industrial. This isn't post. Yeah, most of these plants, I mean, it's well, like giant chemistry sets. You've got some people in the control room running the processes, and you might have a few guys at the sort of doing the physical humping around the plant. But actually the process itself is all automated and it's just going on through a succession of pipes and tubes and pressure vessels. Got a few guys sitting at computer consoles who are just most of the time just monitoring the thing. I mean, it's making sure nothing goes wrong. When it was owned by ICI had an interest in the integrity of the whole complex, whereas now individual companies are really just interested in the individual plant that they own. And if you've got a plant, say, producing ethylene more cheaply somewhere else in the world, then you might say, well, why do we need an ethylene plant here? You know, we can source our ethylene from, I don't know, India.
Those who don't have the power would like to do something about the river. Those who have the power, they don't want to do anything about the river except make more money out of it. So it's a question of power. It's a question of who calls the shots.
स्पेशल कैमरा है सोनी कंपनी HDV।
तुम्हारा क्या नाम?
मेरा नाम जगन्नाथ है।
जगन्नाथ? जगत का नाथ?
हाँ।
यमुना का नाथ?
वही मान लो।
कितना बार जाल डालता है?
दिन में 3-4 बार तो डाल देते हैं। बस फिर खाना वाना बनाते हैं, फिर बना के खा पी के फिर निकलते हैं। रोज मान लो अगर मछली सही मिल जाता है तो करीबन 30 किलो 40 किलो करीब मिल जाता है।
बड़ा मछली की छोटा छोटा?
यही मछली छोटा छोटा 700-800 ग्राम का है।
जमुना में से मगरमच्छ निकल जाए ना बाहर।
मगरमच्छ?
हाँ
जमुना
कभी कभार रोज देख। अड़ी तो कछुए और मछली तो पानी में रहती थी, कछुए बाहर निकल के बैठा करते थे।
वही चेपुआ मिलता है, बड़ी मछली कम मिलता है।
पानी गंदा पानी होता है ना, गंदा पानी छोड़ देता है, इसी के लिए दिक्कत पड़ता है।
किधर से गंदा पानी छोड़ता
है? ऊपर से छोड़ता है।
ऊपर से मतलब?
ये जो आपका इसमें 8 नंबर ड्रेन है ना,
सोनीपत से।
सोनीपत
चामड़ा फैक्ट्री का जो पानी आ रही है,
यही पानी तो बेकार कर रहा है, तीजा का पानी है।
I would say that the farmers on the floodplain, the slums and the villages on the banks, the fishermen, the people who dive into the water to take out stuff, to some extent the priests, the wrestlers on the banks, who also have some kind of an organic linkage with the river.
यहाँ तो इतना गंदा है जमुना किनारे कुर्सिया घाट पर, गुजराबाद से आगे हम टट्टी हाथ नहीं धो सकते। टट्टी हाथ धोए तो हमारे फोड़ा फुंसी हो जाए।
यहाँ पे यमुना जी के किनारे चंदीग्राम अखाड़ा, अंदर काली मंदिर है, श्री हनुमान जी का मंदिर है। मुझे यहाँ 36 साल हो गए पूजा करते हुए, और यमुना माता की कृपा है। जो यमुना माता की कृपा से दर्शन करता है, उनका कैमरे का काम हो, कोई भी व्यापार हो, पूर्ण रूप से सफल होता है, धन राज लक्ष्मी प्राप्त होती है।
These people would like to do something, but they have no power. They have no say. Who asks them anyway? You know, they are the uneducated. They don't know. The trouble is they know much more about the river than the educated planner who sits in Vikas Minar.
आबादी बढ़ती गई और उस वक्त में कुल 3 लाख की आबादी थी दिल्ली की बिफोर पार्टीशन, और उसके बाद से ये जिस जैसी आबादी बढ़ती गई, नाले बढ़ते गए और उसमें घुसता गया।
But metro is the worst offender against this river. It is the worst offender because it began the process of encroachment on the river.
अगला स्टेशन यमुना बैंक है, सावधानी से यमुना बैंक स्टेशन mind the gap. दिल्ली मेट्रो में आपका स्वागत है। सावधानी से
यमुना के किनारे में फैक्ट्रियाँ लग रही हैं, साफ गंदगी उसकी फैक्ट्रियों की सब जमुना में जाती है और वो सब बह करके आती है।
You'll also be able to clean up, see? No, we won't, and I'll tell you the reasons why. The US and Europe have been able to do it for two reasons. One is that they have exported the hazards out of their countries. So what was previously polluting the river has been stopped, and it is no longer functioning in their countries. It's gone somewhere else.
Maybe it's polluting our river.
Precisely.
In this time it has been polluting.
So that's part of imperialism. You export your dangers. The second is what cost has this cleanup taken? You know, if you look at the super plan of the US, it's a huge plan of billions of dollars, and where does this money eventually come from? It doesn't come from their own economy. Currently the US is the most indebted nation on earth. Indebted. So that's the cost of development. Can we pay that cost of development? Can we export our hazards? The answer is no. Because we've paid for the development of the West.
वही वेस्ट बात कर रहा है रिवाइवल ऑफ देयर रिवर्स इन देयर नेचुरल सेटिंग। वही वेस्ट बात कर रहा है रिकवरी ऑफ द फ्लड प्लेन्स। तो हम उसकी इस बात को नहीं सुन रहे, हम उसके दुष्कर्मों को देख रहे हैं और वो हम करना चाह रहे हैं।
This is absolutely ridiculous.
Foolish.
When the heavy industry closed and these factories was made to clean up, the Tyne's cleaned up. There's salmon back in the Tyne now. Wait, for a lot of years they were all just polluted out. Is that right?
Right.
And they're back in now, which is good. If one time if you dropped in the Tyne, if anybody fell in or if you went for a swim, you had to go straight to the RVI for injections.
Is that we've had various bits of legislation in the UK that have changed people's thinking. Whether the legislation changes people's thinking or people's thinking changes the legislation is a moot point. The current climate is that we no longer think it's acceptable to have dirty rivers. So we've been putting a lot of effort, a lot of money over a lot of years to put them right.
The sewage part of it is largely done. There are no crude discharges to any of the rivers anymore. That's by law.
Take the Tyne, for example. We've built interceptor sewers on both banks of the river, which have taken in all the former foul flows. We've captured them all. We've taken them down to a major works at the mouth of the river, and they're treated them safe to return to the environment.
The development, which is on a 52-acre site, it's basically a treatment city. We treat industrial waste, we treat domestic waste, and we treat sludge disposal.
So some of the more subtle industrial pollution has only become evident after we got on top of the sewage.
It's all but as clean as the river. It's been through a full treatment process. It's been through UV disinfection. And it certainly has no impact on the river. We're regulated by the Environment Agency, and they are happy with the quality of the discharge from the site.
Well, I mean, the point is, at the moment, we are trying to return the rivers to some kind of not natural state, but some kind of quality state that is acceptable to people.
The industry is closed, and as it's closed, some of the discharges that were taking, industrial effluent discharges, have disappeared.
And so we now have a body of expertise under the heading River Restoration, in which we try, for instance, to take the straight bits and make them meandering again. And we take the bits that have heavy layers of silt on them and clean the silt.
Cut the head on the end of it, rotates, cuts through the sediments, all the rock, sucks it all up. And if you can see the big pipe which comes off the bottom of the dredger, all the dredgings are then taken through that pipeline, and then they go about a mile, maybe about a mile down the shoreline to a big dock which has been infilled, Tyne dock.
The surplus sludge which is produced in the process is sent forward to additional treatment to create energy now. Putting it into 3 large digester tanks which actually create methane, which is stored in the two large circular ball-shaped tanks, and that goes forward into engines to create energy. We hope to produce 4.3 megawatts at the site, so sufficient energy to all but power the entire site.
The Tyne is perhaps the best example really of a severely contaminated river that was brought back to life by enlightened action of public authorities.
The clean water supply it's another area. Really, we're taking away the pollution that's in the water. When we collect it, we have to purify. But the surface water, you have to take out the pollutants, you have to take out the colour.
Indeed, the European standard for bottled water is less demanding actually than the standard for drinking water. So the water from your tap is better for you than the bottled water.
Over the last 20 years, Northumbrian Water's invested somewhere in the region of £2 billion, and that can be more or less split approximately half on water treatment improvements and half on sewage works improvements.
I think we take probably about 500-600 megalitres a day from the rivers to treat for drinking water in the Northumbrian region.
I think we have somewhere in the region of more than 400 sewage treatment works.
All in the northeast?
All in the northeast. And they can be small in a little rural community, or major, like in the sense of the Tyne. And we have probably about 8 major water treatment works. So it's a huge operation.
So how much water do you hold in this dam at any point of time, for example?
Maximum, they reckon it's about 44 billion gallons, and they say that's about enough for every person in the world to have 7 gallons. The surface area is around about 3,000 acres, and at the deepest point here in the valve tower it's about 52 metres, so it's a lot of water. The largest man-made reservoir in northern Europe, set in the largest forest in the whole of Europe.
And we see different sorts of industries now, cleaner industries that are mindful of the environment, and we've been able to provide the infrastructure that helps us to keep those rivers clean.
That's our challenge, if you like. You know, can we come up with a more human corporate model for the next industrial revolution in comparison to the one before? You know?
So basically, there isn't the heavy industry area that it was. There's lots of new technology if you go to the Team Valley and other areas, and we're actually trying to get into the high-speed train manufacture in Gateshead, a new high technology area. We no longer want turbines and tanks. We want computers and televisions and
जल पे है अधिकार वो ना हमने जो अपने गांव चुने हैं पड़ाव से वो हर तरह से अलग अलग है उन सब की अलग अलग चीजें हैं न्यू फैक्ट्स हैं हर गांव में कहीं किसी गांव में जमीन का फैक्ट है तो किसी गांव में कुएं सूखने का फैक्ट है कहीं धरती का पेट बिल्कुल खाली हो गया है तो कहीं पॉल्यूशन के कारण बीमारी है तो कहीं किसी के कारण सब जो भी हमने अपने पड़ाव के गांव चुने हैं उन सब के सवाल अलग अलग हैं
Rejuvenating rivers. So these short 3 films on the Ganga
Then on the Yamuna, we will be joined by Manoj Mishra and Rajinder Singh, and then Naki
अब चीफ मिनिस्टर जो है उनको इतनी समझ नहीं है और उनको इतना वक्त नहीं है 10 मिनट की पिक्चर देख सकती हैं तो वो हमने जो बनाई है वो In one of the glasses is Yamuna sand. This is the same sand that populates the floodplains of the Yamuna, which are 100 square kilometers large and 40 meters deep. And now you will see how much water this sand can hold. So you see, if you compare the levels of the two glasses, that at least 50% of the water has soaked into the sand. And this is exactly what the Yamuna floodplain can do for you. Half of that amount, that's about 1 billion cubic meters, and that is very close to what the Jal Board supplies Delhi today. तो इसका मूल्य उन लोगों को समझ आएगा कि 10-20 हज़ार करोड़ का है हर साल का। लेफ्टिनेंट गवर्नर ने तो देख लिए, प्राइम मिनिस्टर के यहाँ भी दे चुके हैं, तो ये लोग थोड़े देख लें तो उनको पता चल जाएगा। एक सेकंड मुझ पर दीजिए।
कम से कम 800 क्यूसेक्स पानी, साफ पानी आना चाहिए, दिल्ली के से होते हुए बहना चाहिए। आज तक उसमें जरा भी साफ पानी नहीं आता। 88 से तो बहुत ही हालत खराब शुरू होने हुआ, इसको सुप्रीम कोर्ट में रेज करना पड़ा। मेनली हमारा केस जो है वो यही दो इश्यूज पर है, बहाव जो कि नदी का होना चाहिए और उसकी सूक्ष्मता कितना साफ है वो।
What's happening today is industries are extracting more water, using more water, polluting it and discharging it into the nearby drains.
और फिर क्या हो रहा है? यही पानी आगरा कैनाल से खेतों में जा रहा है। अरे भैया, अगर खेतों में ही जाना है इस पानी को, तो फिर नदी में क्यों डाल रहे हो? इसको उधर से ही नजाकर ड्रेन को ऐसा रीडायरेक्ट कर दो, let it go to northwest Delhi, let it feed the agricultural fields there.
There are many studies which have shown high levels of pesticides and heavy metals in vegetables, leafy vegetables in particular, the cabbage, cauliflower, etc., and spinach and everything, and also in milk. So it's evident, okay, because you are using Yamuna water, which is heavily contaminated with industrial waste.
A daily discharge of sewage 3000 MLD से ज़्यादा हो गया है।
If you look at the Delhi Jal Board, then you will find that only 50% of the sewage which is coming in from these sewered areas is actually being treated. 50% goes untreated entirely. It's directly released into the Yamuna. So that's why when you go to the river, you see that it is basically just sort of floating shit, and it's directly a consequence of Delhi's population, especially its better off people and the government.
मर गई है भैया, मर गई है यमुना में इस वक्त। केवल सरकारी कब्जे कहें उसको, या यूं कहें कि एक्वायर करने के नाम पर, राजहित के नाम पर ये जो सब गड़बड़ कर रहे हैं, यमुना तो मर गई है, कोई बचाने वाला मर गई है। लेकिन फिर भी जैसी भी है, बूढ़ी माँ मरने से बचाई जा सकती हो।
But the feminization of rivers is actually concealing something very significant, which is you can rape, you can maim, they are property.
They're also somewhat powerless.
They are powerless.
Especially in front of the male developmental brigade.
Precisely. So the feminization of the river conceals a huge notion of masculinity and of domination and control. So we should not, glorify this feminization beyond a point.
ये है यमुना मैया, देखो इसकी हालत।
नहीं, ये गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कोई ढीलापन है और लोगों की तरफ से उनकी नॉलेज नहीं है, कुछ पता ही नहीं है।
Over the last couple of years, the government of Delhi has gone in a back foot. Whatever the NGOs say on river pollution or on encroachments, they have been silent, and a very well planned silence over all these issues which are raised by the civil society. Now you must also understand that the silence is very dangerous because they are doing whatever they want to on the back doors. They see opportunity in the river. The river getting more polluted is an opportunity for them to bring in more investments. However mindless their plans are, there are bilateral, multilateral agencies who are ready to fund it.
ये 2007 में मैंने केस हाई कोर्ट में डाला कि जो डीडीए का जोनल प्लान है उसमें करीब 1100 हेक्टेयर पे इस पे कंस्ट्रक्शंस के प्रोजेक्ट हैं, तो अगर उनको अलाउ किया गया, बनने दिया गया, तो दिल्ली का ग्राउंड वाटर जो रिचार्ज होना है तो वो ख़त्म हो जाएगा।
बहुत जान के दुख होता है, जाके दुख होता है देख के। और अभी उन ज़मीनों को वो एक्वायर कर रहे हैं, एक्वायर करके सीमेंट कंक्रीट के जंगल में बदलना चाहते हैं।
किसी को खाली पानी दिखता है, किसी को खाली जमीन दिखती है, नदी तो पता ही नहीं किसको कहते हैं। तो जमीन है नीचे, थोड़ा पानी ऊपर भरा है, पानी हटा दो तो जमीन तो काम आ जाएगी ना। तो पानी अगर है वहाँ ज़्यादा है तो पानी निकाल लो, पानी काम आ जाएगा, ठीक है। बस तो पानी बह रहा है तो इंजीनियरों को पानी नजर आ रहा है।
एंटी डैम मूवमेंट वालों ने भी नदी की बात बाद में की, डैम की बात पहले की। वाटर एक्टिविस्ट ने पानी की बात पहले की, नदी की बात बाद में की।
मैं गया था नदी बचाने के लिए, कि फ्लड पेन को बचाने के लिए। अब वो केस बन के रह गया कॉमनवेल्थ गेम का जो है, कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट में भी वो खाली कॉमनवेल्थ गेम के बारे में सुन रहे हैं, ना कि नदी के बारे में।
अब ये जो बिल्डिंगें बन रही हैं, ये सब बड़े जो एमपीज हैं उनका कुछ रिश्तेदार है, कोई किसी का बड़े पॉलिटिकल लीडरों का रिश्तेदार है, वो कंपनियां बनाई हुई हैं, बोगस कंपनियां हैं सब। दुबई में उनका दफ्तर होता है, क्या करते हैं वो, पहले ले ली जमीन, मतलब ये मिलेगी, उसी के नाम पे से लोग उसे पैसा ले लिया, फिर उसी के बाद वो पैसा मिला उससे कंस्ट्रक्शन शुरू कर। तो ये तो एक बहुत बड़ा स्कैंडल है, जिसमें कि अब
रूलिंग फैमिलीज तक इन्वॉल्व है, रूलिंग फैमिलीज तक इन्वॉल्व।
हाँ बिल्कुल ठीक है, रूलिंग फैमिली
हम लोग कल से
The river is no longer public interest, it's private interest, and that's what all this litigation is subsuming. Even the litigation which led to the Clean Yamuna, the Yamuna Action Plan, for instance. What has it achieved? It's a dirtier river, firstly. After 1,400 crores have been invested in it.
जो पैसा यमुना एक्शन प्लान में खर्च हुआ सब लोगों की जेब में गया, टॉयलेट कम्प्लेक्सेस में लगा, ऐसे में लगा, लेकिन नदी को डीसिल्ट करने वाला या ब्यूटिफाई करने का आज तक वो पैसा कभी कहीं लगा ही नहीं।
नदी मुझको ये बता, तू मेरी या मैं तेरा। नदी मुझको ये बता, तू मेरी या मैं तेरा। क्यों है दार में कमी और पानी नहीं, क्यों है आँख में नमी पर आंसू नहीं। क्या है उलझनों का मकसद, क्या है तंग सी गई है धुन मेरी।
I think nature has its own way of cleaning its environment, and reeds are one of the important elements of that. They're the soldiers of the cleanup, with planting large areas of reeds to help in the treatment process. At Berkeley, nestling in the shadow almost of the famous Angel of the North statue on the hillside, we have this little works, and not only is it cleaning the water and improving the environment of the River Team, which flows into the River Tees, it is also providing a natural haven for all kinds of creatures, great and small. There are now over 100 species of birds alone. Working together with that natural method, great strides can be achieved.
Jim Teasdale, and I'm the plant operator at Berkeley Sewage Treatment Works. We've got a total combined flow of about 610 litres a second. That's just saying very quick.
Okay.
So
the water that finally comes out, is it very clean?
Very, very clear. Yes, very
clearer
clear.
than the river water.
Oh, definitely, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's excellent, the water that comes out.
We led the world into carboniferous capitalism. This region led the world into it. I think there's a matter of intergenerational justice here, that this region should be at the forefront of helping to get us out of the mess we've got ourselves into.
A lot of agencies would like to take the credit for things being cleaned up, but a lot of it is just down to industry disappearing. So with fewer mines, fewer active mines, with the steelworks closing in various places like Concert, with the shipyards going, basically there's just less crud being chucked into the river to start with. Add to that some sort of positive remediation, some attempts to sort of clean things up, and the broad picture is things are a lot clearer and cleaner.
It's a story about what's happened, and it's part of a narrative that says, okay, well, the industry's gone, we've got to try and tell a story that the place has a future. So the future is not the old industrial past, it's the post-industrial future. But as you say, what does that mean? Is it offices? Is it tourism? Is it agriculture?
Post-industrialisation to me is a misnomer. It's a mistaken term. It's implying a temporal category, but we are after industrialisation, whereas I think we ought to be calling about something like sort of elsewhere industrial society. You know, walk down the streets in Britain and you don't see a post-industrial world. You see somewhere which is saturated with industrial products, and it's just they were all made in China. So I tend not to buy that.
You've had just a quite profound shift in the international division of labour, so that what used to be produced here is now produced elsewhere, and insofar as is needed here is imported.
It's certainly a different economic order. If the old colonialism and the old economic order was confining people in the global south to raw products, raw material production, this has clearly changed beyond recognition. It's by no means a sort of benign or equal. There's neither democratic accountability nor democratic justice.
I mean, neocolonialism from the north, from North America, Western Europe.
Well, lots of people would argue that is the neoliberal order.
The idea of sustainable economic growth, that economic growth can keep on happening. No, it can't. There's only one planet. We're way over the carrying capacity. And we're way over the carrying capacity with half of humanity still sunk in poverty.
Why should these emerging countries not have the fruits of what we have in the West? And they're going to go helter-skelter for to get these things, and in order to do this they must industrialize on a scale that beggars belief, and it is beggaring belief. China's building so many power stations, coal-fired power stations, as I understand is India, and they're not going to stop, and they're not going to worry too much about carbon capture and clean coal technology, the way that perhaps we are in the West.
With quite serious effects also in those parts of the world that have industrialised more recently, on a model that says we will export all we produce, because their capacity, if you like, to feed themselves, to provide for themselves, has been eroded as their economies have switched to export-based models with encouragement from the World Bank and all the rest of it.
मैं कहता हूँ यमुना को बचाने वाले तो यहाँ के किसान हैं, खादर के किसान हैं, इन्हीं के कारण बची हुई है यमुना। तो अब यदि राज ये कहता है कि ज़मीन हमारी है, तो भाई ये किसान भी तो तुम्हारे हैं, ये कहाँ जाएंगे? ये किसी और के हैं क्या?
ये डेवलपमेंट चल रहा है,
ये डिस्ट्रक्शन चल रहा है. दिस इज नॉट ए डेवलपमेंट, दिस इज द डिस्ट्रक्शन.
क्षेत्र में आप रेत के ढेर के ऊपर अट्टालिकाएं खड़ा किसके लिए कर रहे हो? किसको ये मौत का इनविटेशन दे रहे हो?
The engineering lobby has taken over. They have all the systems. The long-term consequences will be seen when they come.
That we are really going to govern this country. We are going to govern this honestly. We are going to govern it with a sense of responsibility to the citizens of this country, on whose money this country is running.
You tried the new bird?
Yeah, I did.
What?
This is a pheasant-tailed jacana flying, which is of course breeds around here at this time of the year. There are plenty of them around. You can take a shot if you want to. It's right over there. Delhi and Noida are the only city in the world which have a protected area, a sanctuary right next door, right in the middle of 1.5 crore of people, where you can see over 400 species in a year. The number of birds on peak, especially at the morning time or late in the evening time at the roosting time, this area could possibly hold about 50,000 birds at any point of time, when all the migratory birds are here. So I have seen more than 300 bird species around here. I've recorded them on camera. हॉर्टिकल्चर वाले तो परमिशन लिए फॉरेस्ट वालों से ये सब करने की?
अधिकारी ने बोला वो जब भी काम कर रहे हैं।
नहीं अधिकारी गए बाढ़ के अंदर यार।
कौन सा जगह?
अरे यार ये बच्चे दे रखे, देख वो बैठा वहाँ पे 3 बच्चे घूम रहे हैं उसके, मारेगा क्या उनको? मर्डर करना है तो बात दूसरी है। हाँ तो फिर अपना तरीका यहाँ से करने दूंगा।
ये इसका क्लोजअप है, आप देखिए ये जो क्षेत्र हैं 1, 2, 3 और एक इधर है 4, ये एरिया इन्होंने कॉमर्शियल और इंस्टीट्यूशनल यूज के लिए कन्वर्ट कर रहे हैं। देखिए नदी बिल्कुल नेक्स्ट यहाँ से बहती है। अब अगर यहाँ से फ्लड आएगा तो फ्लड को फैलने के लिए जगह चाहिए कि नहीं चाहिए? जब इसका नाम फ्लड प्लेन है तो इसका मतलब क्या है कि इसका लैंड यूज सिर्फ फ्लड है, सिर्फ एक क्षेत्र है जो थोड़ा सा सुरक्षित माना जा सकता है, जो कि ओखला बर्ड पार्क है जो नोएडा में। बाकी सब का सब जो क्षेत्र है उसमें कुछ ना कुछ या हो गया है या हो रहा है। तो आपकी रिपोर्ट कहती है कि इसको सुरक्षित रखो, और रिपोर्ट मिलने के बाद भी आपका इस तरह से अतिक्रमण, एंक्रोचमेंट बाय द स्टेट ऑन टू द फ्लड प्लेन कंटिन्यूज। तो अगर कुछ करना ही है वाकई आपको इस क्षेत्र के साथ में रिवर बेड के, तो ओखला बर्ड पार्क को नोटिफाई कर दीजिए, एक्सटेंड कर दीजिए। इससे बढ़िया और क्या आप इस शहर को वरदान के रूप में दे सकते हैं? वरदान देना सीखो, अभिशाप नहीं।
Well, if you look at where there is land to be developed in Delhi, where there is land that is in the heart of the city and that can be developed commercially, it's the Yamuna floodplain. So it's prized land.
और दूसरी बात बहुत जरूरी ये है कि अगर कोई नदी की हालत आप इतनी खराब देखते हैं तो उस नदी को लेकर के विकास की बात करना तो सबसे बड़ा अपराध है। और डीडीए ने जो जितनी रिपोर्ट बनाई थी वो ये बात लेकर के बनाई थी कि इसको दोबारा रिवाइव करना है। तो अब इसका रिवाइव होना और यहाँ पर कंस्ट्रक्शंस का बनना, ये दोनों में कहाँ सामंजस्य, ये मुझे समझ में नहीं आता।
Now, when people die, who will be responsible for their murder? I would call this murder. Who will be responsible? The builders, the people who have sanctioned those buildings, the people who have accepted money to give that land to these people to build. They will be responsible for it.
What's the problem with running over the Commonwealth Games village? It's a 10-day event. We're going to pay for a lifetime for that? What's so great about Commonwealth Games? Why don't we have akhadas and kabaddi in every settlement across the land? What's wrong with that? You want sport? You want physical improvement? You want fitness? Well, people should be able to play.
अभी उस जमीन में जो कीमत है वो है 10,000 रुपए स्क्वायर मीटर। खेल गांव जो कि इस देश को थोड़ा इज्जत के साथ जोड़ के दिखा दिया है कि भाई इससे हमारी इज्जत जुड़ी है, खेल गांव बनने से उसकी कीमत होगी 1 लाख रुपए गज। अभी हमारे नेताओं को उस जमीन की कीमत ही दिख रही है, और वो जमीन की कीमत कुछ लोगों के हाथ में आएगी ऐसा नहीं है। वो केवल मुश्किल से, यदि मैं उंगली पे गिना सकता हूं कि इतने लोगों के हाथ में जाए, इससे ज्यादा लोगों के हाथ में नहीं जाएगी। लाखों लोगों की जो जमीन वो है, जिन किसानों की वो जमीन है, उनको उसमें से कुछ नहीं मिलने वाला। वो कुछ चंद पॉलिटिशियंस के जेब में चली जाएगी और उनको कुछ एक आध इलेक्शन में मदद मिल जाएगी। मुझे लगता है कि हमें ऐसा नहीं होने देना चाहिए।
It's a real estate game, you know. Land has become juicy and it is very attractive. So real estate, it's a nexus between the real estate lobby and the government. Okay, so we must understand that.
इस काम में 3 आदमी लगे हुए हैं। सबसे पहले तो ये जो इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है ना, जिनको मल्टीनेशनल कहते हैं, सबसे ज्यादा रोल तो उनका है। अब इस इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में वर्ल्ड बैंक भी और ये सब WHO भी सब शामिल है, वर्ल्ड हेल्थ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन सब शामिल है। क्यों शामिल है? क्योंकि उनसे संबंधित बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों की बड़ी बड़ी मशीनें हम कर्जा लेके खरीदेंगे, और मैली राजनीति के कारण वो सारा पैसा, एक तरफ तो हम उनसे कर्जा लेंगे, एक तरफ तो हम जापान गवर्नमेंट से पैसा ले देंगे यमुना शुद्धि के लिए, और दूसरी तरफ वही पैसा उनके पास जा रहा है क्योंकि हम उनसे मशीनें खरीद रहे हैं। तो ये जो दौर है, ये दौर बहुत भयानक है, बहुत खतरनाक है।
There are centuries of grime, goodness knows what it holds, covered over with a crust on the riverbed.
So mines that were worked 3,500 years ago that are still producing pollution today.
Yeah. Things will stay there for an awful long time, maybe forever. Maybe we can never repair it.
Quite often the legislation follows on from the acceptance that things are not right and should be done better.
ट्रस्टीशिप का जो कंसेप्ट है वो यहाँ पर भी लागू होता है, और ये तो अब पूरे वर्ल्ड ओवर इस बात को माना जाने लगा है कि जो पब्लिक ट्रस्ट डॉक्ट्रिन है, ये बेसिस होना चाहिए नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए। तो अगर आपको लगता है कि गवर्नमेंट उसको ठीक तरीके से नहीं देख रही है, तो लोगों को जागरूक होकर के बोलना पड़ेगा कि ये चीज़ें हमारी हैं, अगर आप ठीक तरह से नहीं देख रहे हैं तो आप बताइए कि क्या करें। क्या हम आपसे वापस ले लें सारी चीज़ें, अपनी नदी वापस ले लें, अपने तालाब वापस ले लें, अपने जंगल वापस ले लें, क्या करें ताकि हम उसको ठीक तरह से देख पाएं।
The state as a trustee is under a legal duty to protect the natural resources. In addition, in absence of any legislation, और हमारी जो नदियां हैं, आज की स्थिति में हमारी नदियों को कोई भी लीगल प्रोटेक्शन प्राप्त नहीं है। The executive acting under the doctrine of public trust cannot abdicate the natural resources and convert them into private ownership or for commercial use. Now, these are the words of Supreme Court of India. और ये सब जो कुछ भी हो रहा है, चाहे वो खेल गांव हो, चाहे वो मेट्रो का एरिया हो, चाहे वो अक्षरधाम हो, चाहे वो ये नोएडा के द्वारा जो किया जा रहा काम है, ये सब into private ownership and commercial use है. This is all in stark violation of what the Supreme Court has observed.
जहाँ तक वकील का प्रश्न है, वो तो यही है कि इसके अंदर जो भी लीगल रेमेडीज हैं कि आप रिव्यू फाइल करें, रिव्यू के बाद में और भी जो इसकी प्रक्रिया है, विधि की प्रक्रिया, उसको मान करके चलें। और एक नागरिक की तरह जो मुझे बुरा लग रहा है, तो मुझे लगता है कि वो सभी को बुरा लगना चाहिए कि ये जो नुकसान हमारे पर्यावरण के ऊपर, हमारी नदियों के ऊपर, तालाबों के ऊपर जो कुछ हो रहा है, कहीं ना कहीं उसके ऊपर रोक लगे, और लोगों को मुझे लगता है इसके बारे में जागरूक होना बहुत बहुत ज़रूरी है। अब ये समय आ गया, इसके बाद में मुझे नहीं लगता वो समय बचेगा जब हम कुछ कह पाएंगे। सब खत्म हो जाएगा उसके बाद में, तो कुछ कहने के लिए रहेगा नहीं।
प्रकृति के साथ जब हमारा लेन देन संतुलित नहीं होता, तब प्रकृति ची बोल जाती है, जवाब दे देती है, और फिर सत्यानाश शुरू होता है, प्रलय होता है।
जब तक ईश्वरीय कुदरती कोई मार होगी,
जब ही जमुना साफ हो सकती है और नदी को
You forget, we have to ignite minds, you know. Just like you ignite rockets, you have to ignite minds so that you can set fire to the planet. That's the notion of development that we have. You know, it makes damn good publicity. It's all rubbish. It has got nothing to do with real life.
There is a chance of rivers getting cleaner.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we can prove it. It's been done. And, you know, the work that we did on mine water pollution, in some cases we had tributaries of the Wear and the Tyne that had been dead for 40 years. And then we went and did projects with passive treatment, and now they're alive. You know, it's amazing how quickly the aquatic life moves back into a river once you stop the source of pollution.
जबकि पंजाब के अंदर कपूरथले के नज़दीक एक संत है, संत बलबीर सिंह सीचेवाल। वहाँ पे एक नदी बहती है, वेई नदी। वो इतनी गंदी हो चुकी थी कि उसको देख के 1 मील से बदबू आती थी। उन संत जी ने उस नदी को अकेले अपने दम पर नदी को साफ किया और नदी ऐसी बन गई जैसे गंगा का किनारा।
काली बीम में अपना फ्लो वापस आया और काली बीम में जो नाले गिर रहे थे उनका डायरेक्शन बदल दिया।
हम चाहते हैं कि दिल्ली के अंदर भी कोई ऐसा संत आए जो आके जमुना नदी को साफ करके इसकी पुराने गौरव को बहाल कर दे।
We are moving from certain kinds of industry on the river to new kinds of industry. We're making sure that contaminated land is cleaned up through that development process. We're making sure that leachate and discharges are picked up during that process, so that we're actually using the opportunities that those development proposals create to actually further increase the quality of the river.
If you're an eco-modernist and an optimist, you would say that actually the win-win situation for the future is that the new model of accumulation will be around these environmentally friendly and environmentally cleansing industries. And we'll both deal with the environmental problems and we'll keep the growth model going.
The question is, what is this notion of development? And if you look at it internationally, who do we call the developed nations? It's all the nations that have made a mess of the world. And we still continue calling them developed. So that's our notion of development, and we are not challenging that. Until and unless we challenge that notion of development itself and say this is not what is required. You know, climate change currently is also posing the same question. Is this the model of development that you require? And they keep saying no, but they keep coming back to it, saying technically, you know, if we can fiddle around with it, we can come back to it, we can manage it, which is a completely mistaken model.
They have no idea of the scale of energy conversion that's needed to sustain the lifestyle we have. Partly because we have a wasteful consumer society. And I don't hear these politicians especially trying to say that, you know, say things like Mahatma Gandhi said, you know, to try and dissuade us from a materialist path onto a much more human and a much more spiritual path. Well, you can probably see he's on the wall behind me, you know.
Yeah.
The three of my heroes.
Oh, nice.
They're all spiritual men and all men of immense ethical strength, and who really saw things as I believe they are. They saw the transcendent reality, not the petty here and now, and they changed things in a big way.
We have to consider things in their entirety. We have to behave rationally, and rationally does not mean education. Rationally means an appreciation of the linkages between different aspects of life. It's an integrated vision, which we've lost.
It's quite clearly is one world, but it's just a very unfair one world. I mean, the point about this is it's definitely one world because it's definitely connected.
Absolutely, and that may force some very, if you like, some quite hard choices quite quickly. in terms of what is possible, but not even what is possible, but what is necessary. You know, the old, there was some Klaus Offer, the old phrase of the impossible being necessary and the necessary being impossible. Well, I think we may be getting to the point where the impossible is becoming necessary.
क्या क्या बेचते हो ये बताओ?
डी एंड का सामान जी।
डी एंड का सामान
ले लेते हैं जी 700 रुपये पूरे सामान के। बाबू जी सामान भी तो देते हैं, इसमें घी भी होता है, चंदन भी होती है, सामग्री भी होती है, काठी भी होती है, कपड़ा भी होता है 5 मीटर।
असली की नकली सब?
सब असली है बाबू जी। नकली इस चीज़ में भी लास्ट अंतरा में भी हम गलत करेंगे।
क्या रखा हुआ है साहब, तो आप जो चीज़ गुजर गई उसको देखने आए हो।
कोई नहीं पराया, एक बाग के फूल हैं हम सब, एक बाग के फूल हैं हम सब, एक ही माला के मोती, सब में एक ही है ज्योति, इतने हैं संसार के प्राणी, सब में एक ही है ज्योति। जागो और जगाओ प्यारे, जागो और जगाओ प्यारे, समय ये ऐसा आया रे, सबसे कर लो प्यार, जगत में कोई नहीं पराया रे, सबसे कर लो प्यार, जगत में।
मेरा नाम वैसे तो शिवनारायण है जी, और सब नाम मेरा कोई नहीं जानता। दिल्ली में एक कार थी सिर्फ, सारी दिल्ली में, राय साहब लाला चुन्नौल वालों के पास। $91 ईयर की एज हो रही है हमारी। ताऊ जी के नाम से जानते हैं।